Welcome to Through the Bible with Pastor Michael, a podcast from First Baptist Church in Mustang, Oklahoma. Here's Pastor Michael.
All right, it is May day 10, and we today are going to look at an entire book of the Old Testament, the book of Ruth. And so as we keep marching on in our study, we get an entire book today that we start and complete. Ruth is just 4 short chapters, pretty well-known book of the Bible, with a whole lot of detail that's there the more that we study and get into it. This is one of those occasions where it's very difficult for me just to limit myself to 5 observations and 5 applications because there's so much here. I want to resist the temptation, though, to preach too much here. I want to stay in the rhythm of what we're doing this year and just try to hit the highlights and the flow of the story and have some emphasis on what we can do with this. But Ruth is a book that I have taught many times and am so enriched by. I know you'll enjoy reading it today. 5 observations. Number 1, Elimelech leads his family to leave home and go to Moab because of a famine. It's interesting because the language here in the first part of chapter 1 indicates that his thought was just to go on a quick sojourn. He was not planning to go and relocate and resettle somewhere. This was just going to be a short-term thing. But they end up leaving and going to Moab, and they lived there for 10 years, according to chapter 1, verse 4. And then a second thing we see is that in Moab, Naomi's husband and her 2 sons died. So when they leave Bethlehem, you have Elimelech and Naomi, Mahlon and Chilion, and they go to Moab. And there, their 2 sons meet and marry 2 Moabite ladies, Ruth and Orpah. While they're there, Elimelech, the husband and father, dies, as do the sons. And so Naomi's entire life in this short span has been turned completely upside down. She's had to grieve the loss of a husband. She's had to grieve the loss of 2 sons. It's really more than we can even imagine or stand to consider. It's a hard time for her. She comes back home, and our third observation is that upon returning to Bethlehem, Naomi changes her name. She says, "Don't call me Naomi, a name that means pleasant. Call me Marah, a name that means bitter. Don't call me pleasant. Call me bitter, because," she says, "the Lord has been bitter to me." Verse 13, "It is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." That's what she says to Ruth and Orpah, where she tries to get them to stay and not come back. Then in verse 20, she comes back home. The townspeople say, "Is that Naomi? Is that her?" And part of why they would be unsure, some because of the passage of time. But remember, she's gone through extreme grief. No doubt her countenance has changed, her look has changed, the pain of grief undoubtedly being worn on her face. And so they see her and say, is that Naomi? Is that pleasant? Which is what her name meant. And she says in verse 20, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Marah, for the Lord has dealt very bitterly with me." And in a really interesting statement here, verse 21, Naomi says, "I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." Now, when she says that, Ruth is right there. When she says to the townspeople, "I went away full, I've come home empty, I've come back with nothing," Ruth's right there. And you can just imagine Ruth saying, "I'm right here." Ruth has left her family, left her country, joined and aligned herself with Naomi and has said, where you go, I'll go. Your God is my God. Your people are my people. Where you lodge, I'll lodge. Where you die, I'll die. She's made this great statement of commitment and loyalty. And Naomi is so bitter at this point that she says to the townspeople, I don't have anything, while her daughter in law is right there beside her. And while Naomi doesn't come across very likable here, let me do point out and remind you though that she has been through extreme grief. And I think it's a reminder to us that we've got to be patient and compassionate and strive to be understanding with those who are hurting and those who are grieving. It's easy for us sometimes to say to people, just move on, just get over it, you know. But it's hard. People go through really, really hard things in life. Maybe even you today listening to this, maybe you've been through something in your life that was so painful and has changed you so profoundly that it's hard for you to see or consider any of the Lord's blessings. And so I just want to say to those who are around those who are grieving, those who are friends with those who are hurting, be patient, have compassion on them. What Naomi says here isn't particularly kind, but she's hurting, she's grieving, she's lost a lot, and just a reminder to us to be patient and seek to be understanding with those around us. A fourth observation through the book of Ruth is that Boaz then chooses Ruth to marry her and serves as the kinsman redeemer. He is going to do the work of redeeming the land, and in so doing, he is going to marry Ruth. And then a fifth observation, Boaz and Ruth have Obed, and as the text tells us, he then is a part of the lineage of David. Verse 22, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. So what does all this mean for us? By the way, very difficult to take the entire story of Ruth in a chronological way and just come up with simply 5 observations, but that's the big things of what's happening in those 4 chapters. 5 applications. Number 1, loyalty, family, and friendship are great gifts of the Lord. Ruth is loyal to Naomi. Naomi, on the way back from Moab to Bethlehem, gives her the silent treatment. Upon re-entering into Bethlehem, essentially ignores Ruth. And yet you see that relationship and that friendship begin to flourish. You see Ruth working hard to provide for Naomi. You see Naomi trying to lead and give advice and help to Ruth. And then you see that their friendship and their loyalty on display. Loyalty and family and friendships are great gifts from the Lord. The second application is that God patiently works in the lives of people even if they are slow to trust. So much of the first part of the book of Ruth is really tragic. Elimelech leads his family to leave the promised land. They go to Moab, of all places. His sons marry Moabite ladies, which they were not to do. I mean, everything about the first part of this is really sad and tragic, and yet God is patiently working in their lives, even in bringing Naomi and Ruth back to Bethlehem. As bitter and angry and grief-stricken and emotional and distraught as Naomi is, God is still patiently working in her life. Take heart, he's doing the same for you too. A third application is that noble character is a great way to earn trust and respect. When Boaz meets Ruth, he says, I've heard of what you've done. I heard of your loyalty to your mother-in-law. I heard that you came to glean. I heard that you are a hard, diligent worker. I heard that you came here early and have remained here all day. Her noble character is making room for her. Her loyalty, her work ethic, her kindness, her diligence is creating space for her in the eyes of other people. Fourth, God is at work even in the details of our lives. Every detail here in the book of Ruth is all about providence. When people think about God doing amazing things, our mind usually goes to miracles. Miracles are the very rare occurrence where God steps into the laws of space and nature and does things that otherwise could never happen, where he breaks or interrupts the laws of nature. That's very rare. It's very rare even in the Bible. Miracles happened around the time of Moses. They happen again with Elisha and Elijah. Happens again with Jesus and the apostles. But it really is primarily limited to those 3 seasons, very short seasons of time, in fact. God can do anything. God can do miracles if he chooses to. He's free to do that. But you don't see them often. Instead, what you do see all the time are what we would call acts of providence. Acts of providence are where God is not breaking laws of nature. He's just sovereignly orchestrating things, even in the small details, for the good of his people. And you see that here in the book of Ruth, that they happen to come back to Bethlehem. She happens to go to a field that belongs to Boaz. Boaz happens to recognize her. Boaz happens to leave or give the order to leave some grain behind so she can provide. Boaz happens to be a kinsman redeemer. Boaz happens to be interested in doing that work. All of it is acts of providence. There's no miracles in the book of Ruth. There's no laws of nature that are suspended in the book of Ruth, but it's all just one giant providence after the other. It's the hand of God, the blessing of God, the working of God. And so many Christians miss the nearness and the kindness of God because they're not looking for his hand of providence. Now, look, again, God's free to do any miracle he wants to do, and God can do a miracle in my life in any direction if he so chooses. But miracles are not what we're looking for. We want to notice the acts of providence, the things that the Lord does on our behalf. We're not suspending the laws of nature. He's just showing his kindness to his people. The Lord brought me and my wife together, allowed us to meet, allowed us to be able to marry, and have enjoyed at this point 28 years of married life together. When he brought us together, there were no miracles, but it was just one act of providence after the other, after the other, after the other. I've had the amazing privilege of serving this local church here for 24 years at this point. No miracles were done to bring me to this church. But if I look back and see how did I land here, it was just one act of providence after the other, after the other. God is at work in the details of our lives. And the quicker we see that and recognize that, the more we can trust that he is at work every day in all things, in the smallest details, leading us and loving us and orchestrating things for our good. And we want to trust and be grateful for his acts of providence. Which leads us to a fifth and final application, and that is to rest in that providence of God. Rest in the providence of God. Be obedient, be faithful, do what you're called to do, live the life Christians are supposed to live, treat people the right way, serve others, be humble, all the things Scripture calls us to do. And then just rest in knowing that the providence of God is an umbrella to shield you and it's a compass to lead you. You don't have to try to force things or create things to happen. Be obedient, be faithful, be godly in your character, be hardworking, and then rest under the sweet providence of God and let Him do for you on your behalf what His will has purposed to do. And then a summary of Proverbs 23, 1 to 18. There is no reason to envy sinners, because true joy comes from loving the Lord. This is a repetitive theme in the Psalms and the Proverbs. We don't want to be envious of the wicked. We're not envious of sinners. We don't want what they have. We don't want to be jealous of their life. Instead, enjoy the true happiness that comes from loving the Lord. All right? Enjoy reading the book of Ruth today. Be blessed as you study.